Fish on. All right, my name is Justin Ellis. This is the Topwater podcast. I am your host, and generally I'm always the host. And today is a special day because we actually have our first guest onto the podcast, onto the show. And this is my dad, Larry Ellis. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. I didn't know you were going to do that to me. So
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's part of it. This is all pretty much ad lib, and just, we're just sitting down, having fun, having a little bit of a conversation, And, one of the reasons why I really got into fishing was just because of going fishing as a kid and, going out to those ponds out in Kansas and doing some bass fishing with Grandpa and Uncle Steve and all of them out there, and also getting to going and doing catfishing. And there for a while, I actually got away from it, but now that I kind of got a little bit older, I really got back into it, and now I'm really just keeping the momentum going, and that's the reason why it's kind of like getting into this podcast. So, and part of that is, my history, and I really just wanted to kind of get a little bit further into like our family history and a little bit better knowledge of where all the passion for the outdoors have really come from. Because, I mean, if it wasn't for all the people that are in our family and all the people who, enjoy the outdoors, I don't think I'd probably enjoy it as much. And I probably would have figured out a different type of passion. So, honestly, I would like to know, like, where did you first grow up?
Okay, well, that will explain a lot about why the outdoors was so important, because I grew up in a small town up in Kansas, northeast Kansas. Topeka would be the area most people would recognize. We were about 25 miles west of Topeka and a little bit north, a little town called St. Mary's, and right around St. Mary's, at that time we didn't have a movie theater. If you wanted to see a movie, you had to go to Topeka, so there was a half-hour drive to get to Topeka to see a movie or something like that. And it was very agricultural centered type thing. My father, that's where a lot of this, where my love for the outdoors came from was of course from my father and my mother actually, and but Dad probably was the bigger influence. And Dad grew up in northeast Kansas as well, and he was a child of the Depression era, and so Dad not only fished and hunted for the sport of it, but part of it was a way to supplement their food supply and that type of stuff. And so when we went fishing, actually we didn't target any one species or anything like that. My dad was very simple type fisherman. It was a hook and a weight and a pole and maybe a bobber type thing, or a sink, float, or whatever you want to call it. And he'd go out and basically, cast and sit and wait. And the type of bait we used were most of the time were worms, night crawlers, that type thing, and minnows sometimes, and sometimes if especially we were looking for catfish or something like that, we might have chicken liver or some kind of product like that. And that was it was pretty simple for my dad. And of course then the other thing to understand was northeast Kansas, and you mentioned fishing in the ponds and whatever. Northeast Kansas, that area where we're from, it was largely agricultural, but the geography was what's called the Flint Hills up there.
Yeah,
and that land is not always suited for like crop land. So it was a lot of pasture land. If you're gonna have pastures and you're gonna have cattle in there, then you got to have a water source for cattle. And so a lot of these ponds were actually, drinking place for cattle to drink and that type of stuff. And of course, to help control the grass and everything in the ponds, the farmers would stock them with, who knows what it was stocked with, but usually there was bass, channel cat, a lot of bullhead catfish in those and that type of thing. And we kept almost everything. The only fish that we never kept, and I know my dad got bit by one time, was a gar, and my dad hated those gar, and I've never eaten a gar and never kept one or took it home yet. So, anyways, but we would catch bass, channel cat, the flat bullhead catfish, sometimes crappie, carp, drum, and we kept it all, and we took it home and we cleaned it and ate it and that type of stuff. But only stuff we threw back was the stuff that was small.
Yeah.
And you're just like, no, that's too small. It's not worth, trying to clean and everything. And you're not going to get a lot of meat off of it. So throw it back, let it grow and type thing. So it was kind of novel later on in life when the bass fishing came around and it was kind of like, oh, catch and release. And you're like, that goes against what my nature.
Oh yeah. Anymore it's pretty taboo for a lot of like bass anglers to actually keep bass.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the nice thing about fishing in like the Springfield Lake that's right down here is because there's fish advisories. You're not supposed to eat more than one channel cat per like so many meals, and just because of the toxicity of the water. But that's just because of the the direct relation to it being like right downstream from Springfield. So you have all the runoff that's coming out of Springfield right into there.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that lake has like all the grass in it acts as a filter. So I'm pretty sure it filters out a lot of it moving through the lake. But as far as the fish inside the lake, you don't want to really eat any of them out of there. So they actually get pretty big. And this last weekend, I actually ended up catching. Well, it said 5 pounds on the scale, but
wow.
It's a cheap scale, and I'm pretty sure it was like a 6 or 7 pound bass. So, but officially it's a 5 pound bass,
Okay.
So, but and it is kind of interesting to see the dynamic between you have almost this subsistence sort of style of fishing and hunting from your era of growing up until now, where it's kind of almost starting to go back full circle, because there for a little bit it was like pretty taboo to catch anything. You should go to the grocery store and buy stuff, and now everybody's getting into this organic movement. So now there's a lot of people that are starting to get back into hunting because all these deer and all these foraging animals, they sit there and graze off of grasslands, the stuff that they would naturally eat, and people just kind of assume that as they naturally eat, that's what they should be eating too.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, that's all right. See, so one of the other things too that to kind of understand my thing was going back to my father. My dad was number one, he was the type of person that everybody tended to like. My dad. But in that era, in that time, we're talking, Dad got married to Mom in 59, and I was born in 60, so they got busy pretty quick. And in that small town, it was agricultural, and he owned a restaurant. So number one, he was liked a lot, and then with having that restaurant, he knew a lot of people. So one of the things was that we had a lot of permission to get onto a lot of these different ponds and type things. So and then the access was different, because back then the gates weren't locked with keys and that type of stuff. A lot of times it'd be just a baling wire or something that held the gate shut.
Yeah.
So Dad would always, if he knew, we never went onto somebody's property we did not know.
Right.
Or didn't think that we had permission or whatever. So most of the time, I'm pretty sure Dad had permission to get on these different lakes or different ponds I should say. And we had to access because he knew where they tell him where the gate was and what have you, and so he just go up and you go and open the gate, shut the gate behind you, drive up to the pond, and or if you couldn't get in that way, they would tell Dad how you can cross the fence here or whatever and get in there. So we were able to go to a lot of different ponds and fish them, and not only did we have ponds to fish in, but we had creeks, and not the little tiny creek. We had, they were fairly substantial size creeks or sometimes they might be called river type things. But then we had the Kansas River, which was a pretty major water source, and that's, you talked about going catfishing and stuff, and that's where later on, especially with you guys, that we really got into the catfishing and that type of stuff. When I was very young, we never went to the river, because the river's ultimately it can be pretty dangerous if you fall in or something like that, and it can be treacherous. Sometimes it's no big deal and whatever. And later on in my childhood, I mean, we went out, and when the river would get low, there'd be sandbars in the river, and we went out and camped out on some of the sandbars and swam in the river and walked and waited. It'd be down low enough, but there'd be sometimes some pretty deep holes and stuff like that in there too, and that's where you'd a lot of times find the fish. But having access to those holes weren't always easy and that type of thing. So getting back to where I was saying, Dad, number one, he's well known, and he had a lot of permission to go to a lot of different places. And so the earliest memories I have of getting started fishing was the first thing that we had were the cane poles. He didn't have a reel or anything. It was just, and there wasn't a stick that he went out and found, but it was actually a cane pole that he purchased. I don't know, back then they didn't have Walmart and Kmart and whatever, but that he purchased someplace. And so each of us had a cane pole, and it usually had a bobber and a hook and a weight and a worm on it and that type of thing. And probably one of my first story type memories of fishing, because I don't remember the first time we ever went fishing. I really don't remember that, but I do remember we were out fishing. We had those cane poles, and we were on this pond, and I hooked into a bass. It wasn't a big bass. It was probably 10, 12-inch bass, something like that. And of course, you had to drag it up on the shore. And I drug it up on the shore, and it started flopping around on the bank there and flopping, and it got off the hook, and it kept flopping and made its way back into the water. And my brother and I, of course, trying to get him, but, we were probably too scared to grab the fish and that type of stuff. So anyways, it got back in the water and swam off. So pretty soon, catch it, get another one, and I drag it up on the bank, and my brother goes over to my dad's tackle box, and my dad had a knife in there. I don't remember if it was a pocket knife or just an open knife, but the knife was opened, and my brother come over with that knife and just impaled that fish to the ground. So that was one of that one's not getting away, boys. So that was one of my first memories there. And then I remember that same pond, and the next thing that we graduated to were Zebco, rod with a Zebco reel on it, and I remember, because one of the things I always kind of noticed that I will do is like everybody might set up at one area, and I always kind of like look around and kind of go, well, where else can I go, and I try to kind of separate myself a little bit and fish in a little bit different spots and stuff like that. So I went around to the back side of this pond and I was, a young kid, and was fishing back there, and I hooked into, at that time, what I thought was a monster bass. I think it probably weighed about 3 pounds, maybe at the most. But anyways, I remember that I couldn't win the battle with that fish. I mean, it was just tugging so hard for me, and so I turned around and just walked backwards and drug that fish up on the shore, and ended up catching that, and everybody made a big deal about it, and so much a big deal that we went to my grandmother's house, and I got there's a photo somewhere, of me standing there holding this stringer of fish with that big bass out front. I'm standing in front of my grandma's living room in front of her piano with the fish. So that's one of the early memories that I can remember. And then not only did we fish, we hunted a lot, but I tended to gravitate more to the fishing than the hunting. I don't know why. I just kind of enjoyed it more. And I still like to hunt, but I haven't hunted in a long time, and I'm not a good shot at all and stuff like that, and whatever. And my dad and my brother can just nail them quail and stuff like that they hunt for, a lot of bird hunting. And I was never very good at hitting something that's moving. So, anyways, I always liked the fishing way more than I did the hunting anyway.
Yeah, and also most of your fishing's done in a lot warmer weather, so it's usually a little bit more comfortable. Except for like this time of year, I've been getting out there into the nice cold days, and it's been kind of a struggle, but it's been well worth getting out there and getting after it. But yeah, I mean it is really interesting just to kind of hear about like how like Grandpa would just go out and find opportunities, and he would just find opportunities to go out and either go hunting or, because I remember there's a story to where you were telling me about how you guys were driving to church and saw a covey of quail.
Yeah, my dad, he had a great vision for like quail and different animals and stuff like that. Because I remember one time Dad bought us a single shot rifle, a 22, and they saw this rabbit under the, they're going like, shoot the rabbit, and I was shooting at something, but I was going like, I cannot see this rabbit. I don't know what you guys are, and I've come to find out what I was shooting at was a clump of dirt, like, and that type of stuff. So eventually, I don't know, they accredited Steve for shooting it, but because I would shoot at it, he would shoot at it, I would shoot at it, and he would shoot at it, and that thing had to be under there. I don't know how many shots went by that thing before we finally got it. But Dad, him and I were driving to church, and the road that, the speed limit's 55 on there. I don't know how fast we were going, but we were going by these row of trees, and Dad goes, whoa, 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 like that, and he goes, back up, and so I'm backing up, and he goes, look at that, there's a covey of quail down there. And sure enough, man, there was this huge covey of quail, and you can see them all huddled underneath something. And so we went ahead and went to church, and we came back and went and got Steve's dogs and Steve and everything. We went out and hunt and got those birds up and hunted them down. And actually that's when we were doing that, because the birds had kind of split up, and we're going and picking up singles here or there and that type of stuff. And as we're sitting there hunting, this pheasant just comes and lights right in the middle of what we're doing, and male pheasant. So anyways, that was, I got him up and shot him, and that was my first pheasant anyway. As far as the memory goes there and that type of stuff. But
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind doing some pheasant hunting, because I mean, for one thing, those are very pretty birds.
They're beautiful too. They got some colorations on there that's
like or at least I wouldn't mind just getting like a stuffed one or something. I mean, that would be nice to have. I mean, even if I don't shoot it myself, I still think they're just beautiful birds.
Yeah, they are.
But I mean, I like there's a few times, like not few times, but I remember there's one time we went out hunting with Uncle Steve, and I can't remember. I think it was me, Uncle Steve, Scott, and I know you were there. I think Josh stayed back, because Josh usually didn't go on the quail hunting trips. He usually wanted to stay.
Yeah, because there's a lot of walking on that.
Yeah, and we pulled up, and there was a quail just sitting on the post.
Yeah, that was Luke.
Was
Luke that was with us, and I think we were in his vehicle. I don't remember, but we pulled down there on that property. It's the same property where we caught that one big flathead that one time. That's, I guess, a different story. But so we pulled up, and I remember what was funny was they were going like, we were trying to debate whether or not it was worth hunting there. And they're going, man, I just wish there was some kind of sign. And I go, isn't that a quail sitting over there on the fence? And they looked over there, and I remember Luke going, that's a pretty good sign. Because usually quail don't stay on the fence. They usually stay, in the ground and like the ground cover and that type of stuff. But because sometimes you'll be fooled with between a meadowlark and a quail, because they'll fly kind of the same, look kind of the same, and that type of stuff. My brother always called the meadowlarks the Kansas City quail. Those are Kansas City quail. Don't shoot those. So,
yeah. I'm looking forward to getting back up there, but I'm probably won't be getting into the hunting aspect just yet. I still want to keep focusing on the fishing, especially now that having a kayak, getting up into those rivers, I can actually get pretty far back into those creeks and rivers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it would be,
like if you got access to, at Mill Creek there, that's pretty easy to access there, right there at that just north of Mom and Dad's house.
Mm-hmm.
Or actually it's south, not more north. So it's pretty easy access there, but you don't have really good fishing water other than right underneath that bridge is a huge deep hole.
Yeah.
That's got a lot of times has fish in it. But if you just go down, there's some rapids there. You go down past those rapids, and there's several places there that have got some big deep holes in it that you could get to. I don't know with your kayak. I mean, you can carry that kayak down past those rapids. Mm-hmm. And put in and that type of stuff, and you could do a lot of scouting and stuff like that, and because we went one time, and when did we have? We had some kind of float type thing, but we were kind of swimming more than anything, just swimming down and going down as far as we could and that type of stuff. But I do remember there's some places where you go, geez, I'd like to set some lines down here.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I mean that's always something to really kind of think about. And also there's the Vermilion too that empties into that's right outside of St. Mary's.
Right. So if you hear Justin or I say the Caw, we're talking about the Kansas River, because up there they call the Kansas River the Caw.
Yeah, here. But
got somebody at the door here.
Yeah, I know.
You got a little interruption here.
Is there somebody there?
Well, I thought I heard the doorbell ring, and I saw some shadows. So
it might just be a package. But oh well. I didn't order anything.
Your pizza's waiting, man.
Yeah. Well, it looks like it's going to be refrigerated by the time we get to it. But yeah. I'm looking forward to getting back in, and another thing is I'm looking to put some lights onto my kayak, so that way I can go do some night fishing out on like Stockton or going out to some of these lakes and stuff, because getting out where there's boats, I think it's by law you have to have lights, so it's not even just a safety issue. I think it is also a legal issue.
I would think so.
That, and also I already have like an orange flag on my kayak whenever I go out to Stockton, and even then I just kind of feel like, that's almost doesn't seem like it's enough, but the more I'm out there and the more I'm comfortable being around all those boats, it's actually not really that big of a deal, as long as you know where they're going to be traveling.
Right.
You can actually usually just hug the sides, and it's...
Yeah, because usually where you're going to have to worry about it is if you were out in the middle and that type of stuff, and they're going to be moving along, whereas if you're with a kayak, I think you stayed closer to the bank and that type of fishing that away, then, they're not going to be flying right through there and that type of stuff. Usually they're trolling and a lot slower speed if they're up closer to the bank.
Yeah. The only times I really worry about is when I have to cross.
Yeah.
Yeah. And generally when I cross, I usually try to do it at a point in the lake to where like you can see me for a really long distance. So if I'm at some sort of bend, I'll make sure to get to the point to where I can actually be seen from both sides of the bend.
Right.
And it's just trying to maximize my visibility, because the last thing you want to do is not be seen in a kayak, and get ran over by a boat, and that's not a good thing. It's, as far as I know, that's not fun.
No. Wouldn't want that to happen.
No, but I mean, but also at the same time, I really enjoy getting out there and getting on the bank and doing some bank, catfishing off the bank, because it's so much different than just doing it out of a kayak.
Yeah,
because it's more like camping.
Yeah. If you was to ask me, what about a memory, and I got a lot of memories of actually catching fish and that type of stuff. But one of the things that that I kind of like to go back and just kind of revisit is just sitting along the side of the river, the call, and watching the sun go down and just listening to the river. And I remember the little saying we got, because my brother, he'd go, "You hear that?" And you guys go, "What? What?" Go, "Listen, you hear it?" And you guys would be going like, "What?" And he's going, "That's the call of the call." And actually what he's talking about was because you could just sit there and listen to the river as it just kind of gurgled, go by, and it's just really relaxing. And one of the things I would do if the fish aren't biting and whatever is just sit there and look across the river and try to see how long you can still see the trees before you can't see them anymore on the other side, and that type of thing. But I find it very, very relaxing just to sit out there and, just sit. But of course, you don't go out there just to sit and whatever. And we've done pretty good up there fishing on the river, and actually what we go for is the flathead catfish. We'll take channel or a bluehead, or they call them knuckle, or a blue cat, I should say, or a knucklehead is what they'll call those. But the flatheads are what we like, because flatheads tend to eat the live bait. So we go out, and one of the fun things to do is go out first and catch bait, get a little tiny piece of worm, a little hook, and go catch you some perch and different different things like that are good bait fish type thing, and then go on, and then we all load up in the truck and we go to the river. And of course my brother takes everything, including I think the kitchen sink. He'll take a ice box, or not an ice box but a cooler, I guess it is, and he'll have so much crap or stuff in that cooler that you're just going like, good grief, if we get stranded, we're good for 3 or 4 days out here.
Right.
And so we all load up, we head out to the river, and we make our way down the river, find our spots and whatever, and set up and just, fish away and that type of stuff. And we've had plenty of fun stories. Each of us have our own little records that we keep, and oh yeah, this is my record fish and that type of stuff. And so the one I remember the most is that time we were fishing. There was 2 jetties that came out, and what the jetties are there to help to control the bank erosion and that type of stuff. And what the jetty would do is cause a backwater, so that the current isn't running right up to the bank, right along the bank, and eroding the bank. So it causes some backwater behind that jetty. And this jetty where we were at, it had a little bit of a sandbar that came out, and we'd fished one night, and Steve was out there, and you guys all fished one area, and I went up to the top of this sandbar and fished right behind this other jetty, and was fishing just the current would come around that jetty, and so I fished just off the current on the backside of that jetty, and I caught 2 or 3. They weren't huge, but they were 5, 6, 7 pounds, something like that. I think I caught at least 2, if I remember right. And so just me, and Joshua went back out the next night. I think Steve had to work or something. I don't remember, but he wasn't able to go. And so we went out, and the 3 of us were out there. And this night, you 2 took up position on fishing where I'd fished the night before. And I fished down, and I noticed that there was a kind of a hole, a deeper area along that sandbar. And so I was fishing upstream from that hole and letting my bait kind of drift down into that hole. And I think I caught 1 or 2, and I don't remember how many we had caught, but again, we hadn't caught anything really big. And what I remember was it was getting pretty late. I don't know if the moon had gone down yet or not, but it was pretty late, and Joshua, I remember, was asleep. You were always pretty diligent to be fishing and being up and ready to strike at a moment's notice type thing. And
well, the sodas didn't really kind of helped along with that, being a small kid and drinking
Mountain
Dews and Coca-Colas.
Yeah. So anyway, I think I had 2 rods. I can't remember, but I had when we. And the other thing to kind of explain is that when we how we fish for the catfish is we fish with a bait caster, and we try to find those that have the a little switch. So when you throw it out, you'll a lot of times, if you tight line stuff, you'll reel the rod until it clicks and it locks that spool down. Well, when you catfish, what you want to do is throw it out there, and you want to leave that spool free. And you can flip a switch, and so when that line comes off, starts pulling off the spool will make a clicking sound. We call it a clicker. And it'll go click, 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 type of noise.
Yeah.
Or if something really takes off fast with it, it'll make a kind of a noise like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I had one of those, and then the other one I had, and it was on a fishing rod that I'd bought a long time, and it was called Mean Green. So that was Mean Green I was fishing with, but the bait casting rod I had on that didn't have a clicker. So I was sitting there and watching, and all of a sudden I noticed that spool, started peeling off of there, and I'm like, oh man. So I set the hook, and when I did, I thought, oh my gosh, this is a big fish. And so I yelled, I said, fish on. And, because you come running with the flashlight, and Joshua was asleep. And so you came running with the flashlight, and at first I thought, man, this is a big fish. And then I thought, well, he's not as big as I thought, because it started reeling in just pretty easily. And you showed up with the light. And one of the things I didn't realize I was doing was, as I was reeling, I was kind of walking down towards it. So yeah, it was easier to reel in because I was walking towards the fish, and you had the light, and you were shining the light right where the line met the water, and so you were shining the light right there, and I said to you, I said, I don't think he's that big after all. And all of a sudden that thing rolled in the water, and you said one thing, and I say, this is my trophy that I have. It's not something I can put on the wall, but you go, Dad, he's huge. And I can just still remember hearing exactly those words, Dad, he's huge, and how it sounded and everything. And I can play that back over and over in my head like it's like a song that a jingle that you might remember or something like that. And anyways, we got him up to the shore. What I remember is we got him up to the shore, and you were trying to land him, and man, he was just flopping and everything around, and you were getting soaked, and he made another run, and I was just like, oh no, man, we're going to lose this fish. And we got him in, and that was the biggest fish at that time that I'd ever caught, and it weighed 22, I think we counted it at 22 pounds anyway.
Yeah. Well, I just remember when he came up, I know the head wasn't this big, but I swear it was like 1.5 feet, 2 foot. And I think that was just because of like me being a kid. And for some reason, when you're a kid, everything is giant, especially when it's a big fish like that. And I had never seen a catfish that size before. I mean, of course, I've seen the picture of the 50-pounder that Uncle Steve and Grandpa caught. What was it, off of a limb line, off of a brush pile?
Yeah.
And, but that's just a picture,
Yeah.
You're not actually seeing it in real life. So when I saw this, like, actually big catfish, I was like, wow, I was astounded that, that something could be this big.
Yeah, because at that time, I think the biggest thing we'd caught was maybe around 10 pounds or, I don't remember... I really don't remember, if there was maybe something that went over a little over 10 pounds, but nothing over 20 for sure. Nothing over 15 even, I don't think,
Now, Josh did have one on that had to be, like, getting close to that 50-pound mark or 40, 50-pound, because there's one night where we were fishing on the Mill Creek.
Right.
And it was on that, kind of that, where that rock had caved in, and we had a huge bank, and his clicker just started peeling off, and it was just like, "Ee," and he like set the hook, and it just kept peeling off drag. And he's like, it won't come in, and it's just, it kept going, and I can't remember if it broke him off or what, but it was that bigger, thicker, short rod that he had, and it had that thing just bent all the way over, and how a fish that could be that powerful. But I mean, if it's a 50-pound flathead, I mean, it's kind of.
I do remember that he said he set the hook and it pulled him forward. About took him in type thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I caught that 8-pound bass out at Springfield Lake, when it hit and I set the hook, I immediately let out a sigh because I thought I just set the hook into a tree. And then I started feeling the head shakes, and I was like, "Oh no, this is a fish. This is a big fish." And then I started reeling it in, but when I reeled it in, it just started coming towards me. So I was like, I kind of had that same, I don't think it's that big. And then it comes up and like does a little head shake, and I'm like, "Oh no, it is that big." And unfortunately, with that one, I was actually like up on top of a boulder. So as I'm fighting this big fish, I gotta like drop down 5 feet in order to get to the bank.
To get the fish.
Yeah, so it was kind of a hair raising like little section of events. I swear I was gonna lose that fish, but no, I mean, another one that I was really like, that mean green. Mm-hmm. That was the rod that I actually caught my first, like, actually plus 5 pound.
Yeah.
Like, it was a 9-pound flathead. And I remember just sitting there, and like you said, it doesn't have a clicker. And it was me and Uncle Steve, and we were just sitting there. And all of a sudden, I can just hear this, ooh. Yeah. It's just like this. I'm like, what is that noise? And I look at and I just kind of see the rod moving, and I look at the reel, and the reel's just like peeling out of there. So it's like, just the reel just going on free spools, making this little hum. And I'm like, oh, I got a fish. So I set the hook, and I'm starting to fight it in. And then all of a sudden it turns and starts coming towards me. And I went, oh, and I let out the sigh, and Steve's like, "No, reel, it's coming towards you, reel." So I'm like just trying my hardest to catch up to it, because now I have all this slack line because I stopped reeling. And so I reel up, and I finally get back to it, and I set the hook back into it and get it tight again. And then it makes a run and peels out some more drag, and it gets stuck. It gets caught in some rocks, and I'm like, "Oh, I did it again." And then Steve's like, "I'll just give him a little bit of line. Maybe he'll work himself out." And it took like a minute or two, but he eventually worked himself out of those rocks. And we ended up getting it back onto the shore and getting it up. And that mono had like little fray edges where it had gotten caught onto the rock. So if we would have fought that fish for any longer, I definitely would have lost that one.
Yeah.
That one was probably the funnest fight. It wasn't the biggest, but it was definitely the funnest. Well, other than there was one other one to where we were fishing on the Vermilion, and I was getting cold because the sun was going down, and I was like, I better go ahead and go get my bibs on, because I had some Carhartt bibs into the truck.
Right.
And so I went up to the truck, and I take off my boots, and I'm starting to put my bibs on, and all of a sudden I hear my clicker go off, and I'm all the way up the truck. I don't have my boots on or anything, and this is like a fairly public place with all like glass bottles that are broken everywhere, and who knows what's down there. And I just take off running without shoes on to go set the hook. And I'm just like, "Oh, don't step on glass. Don't step on glass." I got to get to this. And I eventually get down there and set the hook, and it ended up being like I can't remember. It was like a 7-pound. I think it was a 7-pound flathead.
Really?
Yeah. It wasn't, I don't know. I don't think I have beaten my 11-pound flathead personal best. I don't think I've beaten that. I think Josh still, as far as the two brothers, I think he still has me with that 15-pound. Or I don't know. Did he catch a bigger one?
I don't think so.
I don't think he has. Well, no. We're going to say he has.
Now, his rod caught a bigger one, and that was when you and I were that same place where we were talking about the quail earlier. We were on that guy's property, and we drove Dad's the property has a levee system.
Well, before you get into the levee system,
Okay.
explain Grandpa's truck, because I think this diesel truck.
I don't. Dad, it was an old beat up diesel truck that it was the last. My dad used to have to drive a lot for the job that he did, all over the country. And this truck had a ton of miles on it, and the seat was wore out because Dad was a 300-pound man. You know, he's a big man, and the seat was wore out, but it was a pretty reliable old truck, you know, and I kind of enjoyed driving it. It was big, had one of them great big stick shifts in it and stuff, you know, and so you and I went out and we were driving on top of these. Like I said, there's a levee system there, and because you talked about Mill Creek, we were fishing downstream from the mouth of Mill Creek, so the levee came. It came. I don't really know how to explain it, but it came down and made like and it teed into the river's levee. Okay, so there was two levees, and we drove on top of the one, and it hadn't been driven on such a long time. The grass was all growed up, and we got down to where we couldn't get any closer to the river because there was an old dead tree laying across it. So we got out and walked down to the river. And we're fishing, and it was a pretty tight spot. It was probably a good. Joshua later we found out was wanting us to come back and pick him up, and we had understood that he did not want to go fishing, and he didn't want to go bait fishing, and wanted us to come back and pick him up. But we went bait fishing, and then went straight out there. So, anyways, it was a pretty tight area for you and I to fish in, and again, there was like a little bit of a jetty type system, so that the current was not right up against the bank there, and you and I were fishing there, and I think we caught one or two, didn't we, early? Yeah. And then we're sitting there, and I have Joshua's rod out, and it's in a rod holder, and then I noticed the line is headed upstream, and the memory there was watching that line go upstream, and then it pulled the rod over. It was in a rod holder, so it pulled it over as far as it could, and then that clicker went off, you know, ring type noise, you know, and set the hook on that one, and went, oh my goodness, this is a big fish. And anyways, I don't have that memory of you going, oh, Dad, he's huge, but the memory there was watching that line go upstream and that rod tipping over, you know. But that one went bigger. It was 25 pounds that we caught on that one. And then the big thing there was to get Dad's. When we went to go home, I'm trying to back that truck up off along that levee, and then I actually drove two tires off the side of the levee, and I couldn't get the truck I couldn't get it back up on top of the levee. Whenever I tried, it would like the dirt brake, you know. And so I said, look, you get out, because if this thing tips over, I don't want you getting hurt. So you got out, and you're standing along there. And when I just, you know, I put it in, I think it was reverse. I think I was in reverse, and I was just going, and just doing all I could to get it up there. And finally, the truck leveled out. And so I thought I was on top of the levee, and you go, Dad, you're down in the cornfield. So the truck had, we end up down off the levee in the guy's cornfield, so I drove it down to a place where I could get it out of there, and it took us 2 or 3 shots to get it out of there, and we finally got that truck out of that guy's cornfield. But yeah, that was the scary part of it, because I could just see us rolling that truck over and everything, and
yeah, that wouldn't have been good, especially with having the biggest fish.
The waste of that was part of it too. Was like, man, if we got to walk home, I can't keep this fish. You know, what am I going to do with this fish? So
yeah, I mean, we probably would have just suspended it off of, like, because I'm pretty sure
walked it back down the river and tied him up, I guess. Is what we could have done, but
raccoons and turtles would have got him.
Who knows? Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, now there's more like access points to the call with boat ramps, because they've been actually putting boat ramps like along.
Yeah, but the problem with, you have access, but now you need something that you can actually get, you get up and down on the call with, and that type of stuff. And since you're on a river, and it can have a pretty good current in it too. If you go downstream, then you got to get back upstream to get to that. So if you go paddling down in a kayak, I don't know how easy it would be to get back upstream in a kayak. I don't know. So if I was going to do anything, I'd go upstream, because you can always come back downstream.
Yeah, the problem is what I've noticed, especially with being out on the James River. Once you start hitting like some decent current, it's really hard to like paddle along, because what ends up happening is you stick your paddle into the water and you're moving it, but when you're moving it along with the current, in order to push yourself against the current,
you got to paddle faster than the current. I would guess.
Even faster. So it's like it's so much more effort to put into it, and even then, you're just not being able to get the same amount of force. That's why it's it seems like, because there was one day I was out fishing on the James, and there was like these little isolated storms that were popping up, and we got nailed with a really heavy rain isolated storm, and I could tell like all the way down at the corner that it wasn't raining over there. Like, so I start heading downstream. Well, there's a guy with a little 2.5 horse on a John boat doing the same thing, and I'm just keeping up with him paddling, and he's just ripping right along. I mean, of course I'm expending energy, and he's just sitting there, putting along. But I mean, you can get going pretty fast in a kayak. It's just, it takes a lot of effort, and I notice, like, especially like trying to get to these a little bit further out places, you really just kind of have to make sure you give yourself enough time in order to get out there, because if you're going to paddle all that distance, you're going to get tired at a certain point. And if there's stuff along the way, which I kind of have a bad habit of finding stuff that I want to fish along the way and then stopping and fishing it. So I'll end up taking like 3 hours out of my day just to get to the spot that I want to fish, just because it's like I'm out just looking around, figuring out what's all around what I want to fish. And maybe what I want to fish maybe come later up on the year, because a lot of those places that I was finding, especially up at Stockton, were places that I think wouldn't be too bad, like towards like your spawn time, because it was that nice pea gravel, and it was a flat, nice flat area, shallow water, and it looked like it would provide pretty decent cover. But I ended up just exploring way too much when I go out there.
Yeah,
but it's part of the fun.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't take the time to take in the surroundings, and you're only just solely focused on fishing, I think you're just missing a whole bunch. And I mean, it's kind of like how you were talking about just sitting out on the river, listening. And one of my fondest memories is just kind of sitting there on a bank, and it was during the middle of the summer, and when the fireflies were just thick, and you look at the opposite bank, and it just looks like this just like sparkling light show going on just right across the stream from you, and it's just amazing. You don't get to see that, if you don't actually go out there and experience it, and this, I mean, I've found a lot of cool things and neat things, just by going out and just sitting down and just taking it in. It's been really kind of cool getting back and really just kind of immersing myself into the environment, and it's really kind of invigorating too. So it's been fun, and and that's why I'm really looking forward to really getting back out into the into those rivers and getting after some of those bigger catfish again.
Yeah, I mean, my bucket list is for eventually I want to get a kayak too, and whatever. But right now with my work and stuff like that, it just doesn't make sense to have one. When I retire and whatever, one of my bucket lists is there's two things I'd like to do with a kayak, and one is to go up and float the Kansas River, and what I would like to do is float it once, explore it, and go to this is where we want to come back, and then go back the next day, and because the thing about, like you said, the access points. Well, those access points, that's where everybody goes. But there's part of the river where people can't get to.
Yeah.
And if you can get to those parts where most people can't get to, and you can find yourself like a brush pile with a deep hole or something like that, you can find some very big fish. And so anyways, I think it'd be a blast just to go camping, maybe, go along and find a sandbar or something like it. You wait till the river's getting lower, and then the fish will hold up in those deeper holes and that type stuff. And so it'd be fun to maybe find a sandbar that's got a deep hole right off of it and that type of stuff, and camp out on that sandbar and fish in that, around those holes and that type of stuff overnight, and set some lines and things like that. I think it'd be a blast, and that's one of my bucket lists to do. The other thing I want to do with the kayak bucket list type thing is to go down to the Buffalo River and float that from up around Ponca all the way down to where it meets in, I think it meets into the White. I can't remember what river it meets into, but anyways, I know that I've heard that's about a 7-day trip, and I think that'd be fun to kind of just take and float that, maybe fish here and there and that type of stuff. Of course, you're not going to catch the giant catfish type stuff.
No, but I mean, you probably getting into some decent smallmouth.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, and hooking into a couple pound smallmouth is pretty fun too.
Yeah, especially with light equipment and that type of stuff. So
yeah, and I even thought about, like, because eventually, like, I wouldn't mind planning a trip over to, like, Tennessee, because I hear Tennessee has a lot of good, like, river systems.
Yeah,
and I would love to take a good, like, week or maybe 2 weeks to go down there and just float some of those river systems that they got down there. It's just Tennessee, I keep hearing, like, a couple of things to where it's like you kind of have to time it, because, like, this time of year, Tennessee gets a lot of rain, so it's all blown out and flooded.
Right.
Especially right now. I guess assuming, like, this year. I watched this one guy's YouTube channel. His name's Alex Rudd. He lives in Tennessee, and right now he's just experiencing some of the highest, like, all the lakes are at, like, summer pool.
Mm-hmm.
So... And it's just at the beginning of their, like, rainy, like, sort of season, their spring season. So they got a lot more water to go. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have a decent amount of water coming our way. Hopefully not as much as we did last year.
Right.
Last year was just a little too insane. There was times to where I'd go out, to where I would drive out to Stockton, look at it, turn around. Like, I wouldn't even mess with it. But after kind of really figuring out more about, the biology of bass, and more about, like, not necessarily the biology of bass, but basically the bass behavior and what they do during certain times of the year and what they do during certain weather patterns. Like, during that flooding, if it gets high like that, I think actually being in a kayak would be a very advantageous sort of thing, just because you can actually get into the wooded areas to where they're going to be pushed back up into, instead of fishing that outside line, Yeah. Because I remember I went up there and I was having a hard time catching fish, and I eventually went back into one of the creeks, and I was just flipping trees with a jig, and I ended up catching a little 2-pound bass, and I couldn't get back really any further, because I was hitting this weird point to where there was a lot of, like, down trees and floating timber that was kind of blocking my path, and I couldn't really push through there. I mean, I probably could have found a way through it if I really just kind of took my time and figured it out.
Right.
But I was getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, so I was...
That's the also, we've been talking a lot about the catfishing and that type of stuff. That's the downside of catfishing is at night, the mosquitoes, and I wear a hoodie because I hate mosquitoes that get in around your ears. You hear that noise, and you slap your hand up over your ear, and then you hear and you're just like, oh. So that's the downside. I don't like the mosquitoes and that type of thing. So that's the bad side of that. But of course, I know we've been talking a lot about catfishing and that type of stuff, but there's been a lot of other types of fishing and stuff too that that we did, and for me, as far as like bass fishing, my dad, he was never really, per se a bass fisherman. He had some lures and stuff like that, but he never hardly ever used them. And I don't know if he really knew how to use them much or not, because he did what he knew how to do. And he was either topwater, I shouldn't say topwater, but fishing with a float, a bobber. But sometimes the wind, if it's in the wrong direction or whatever, you can't do that. So he'd fish tight line, something off the bottom. So he had fished. That's the two ways he fished, and normally he fished with worms or minnows or something like that, or maybe some liver or something like, somewhere along those lines, something along like that is how he fished all the time.
Yeah.
And him and I went out. There was a pond, I don't remember, we called it the 480. And Dad had access to that because it was on the land of the person that he worked for, and Dad had keys and stuff, so he had keys to the locks, so he could that's how the access was different, because these pastures were locked up, whereas in the past, a lot of times they weren't locked, but because you got problems with cattle thieves and stuff like that nowadays, people lock their stuff up. So anyways, Dad had keys to the locks, and we were able to go out there, and we were fishing on that 480, and of course we were fishing, with the bobbers and that type of stuff as we normally would, and I don't remember buying my tackle box, but I know I had a separate tackle box, and one of the things I had, because I didn't have a lot of lures that I went out and bought, but I had one of those. It was a little red worm, plastic worm, and it had 3 hooks in it, and it had little beads and a spinner on the front. And I don't remember, like I said, I don't remember buying it, but I had that in my tackle box, and I thought, well, I'm going to try this, and I remember throwing it out by some cover and pulling, reeling it in, and man, that thing got hammered. And so I was like, whoa, wow, this is pretty cool, because the other fishing hadn't really been doing too much. We hadn't been really catching much. And so I ended up catching a couple. And so then that really turned me on to bass fishing. So I'm like, wow, this is kind of fun, because with bass fishing, it's more than, well, I mean, just go out and throw something out and sit here and wait. It's kind of like you trying to figure out, it's a little more of a mind game, I guess, and it's kind of figuring out, well, where are they going to be? What should I throw? And that type thing. And the great thing I like about that I liked about fishing all those different ponds is a pond is you can get around it, whereas on a lake, if you don't have a boat or you don't have even a kayak, you're pretty limited. But on a big body of water like a lake, to me, it's a lot harder to figure out where are they going to be and that type of stuff, and trying to get to them and whatever. Whereas a pond, it's kind of like, well, this is up here by the dam, and it's probably deeper up here, and I can fish, maybe like a rattle trap or and something like that. Whereas, I'm going to get over here, maybe, worm fish over here. Oh, it's too grassy for stuff off the bottom. So let me try, big thing that my brother loves to fish with is a big bladed Meps spinner and that type of stuff. And so anyways, there's a little more mind, you can think a little bit more, but it's easier to kind of figure out. And well, if they're not biting here, let me just move over a little bit, and okay, let me try it over here, and see, and that type of stuff. So that's one of the things that I like about bass fishing and that type of stuff. So anyways, that's what got me started, was that time there. I remember that. And then the other story about that 480 pond that will ever kind of live in infamy was that Dad and I went out, and I think it was just him and I. You guys must have been pretty young at the time, or maybe not around yet. But I think anyway. So him and I got up, and we got out there. It was pretty early in the morning, and he sat up where he always sat up, and I went clear around the pond. I was over on a point that could access the deep water and the shallow water, but I really was interested in that kind of shallower water, because I kind of figured the bass might be up in there feeding, pushing stuff up into the shallow water. So I had a Meps on, and I made a couple casts, and here comes this old cow. walks in the middle of where I was wanting to fish, and I was like, oh, and I think I tried throwing a dirt clod out there, and it didn't, it just stood there, didn't, out there in the water, and just didn't do anything. So I thought, well, maybe if I can cast this lure and, hit it right in front of the cow or something like that, and it, especially those mips, sometimes that blade will hit and kind of pop, in the water. So I thought, well, maybe if I could do that, that'll get him to move, or hit her, or whatever it was. And so anyways, I made a few casts, and it wasn't happening. I even think I cast one time and went over the back of it and reeled it across the back, and the cow didn't move. And I was like, dang, this ain't working. So I was about ready to give up. I was really kind of disappointed. And again, Dad was over there doing his thing, and Dad would fish with at this time, Dad had an old 5-gallon bucket, and he'd had in there, his that was really kind of his toolbox, you might say, tackle box. He'd had, his rags and his rod holders and different things like that. And then he'd pull all that, turn that bucket over, and sit on top of that bucket. So he's sitting over there, and I'm directly across from him, but he's in deeper water where he is, and I'm on this point that's kind of directly across from him. And so anyways, I said, well, I'm going to make one more cast, but what I'm going to throw this thing arch it way up, and hopefully it's going to come down right in front of that cow and hit hard and splash and scare that thing out of there.
Yeah. So
I make this big arching cast, and that darn thing landed smack dab on the back of that cow. And it must have dug in, because that cow jumped up and turned around and started running out of that water and running across that pasture. And, of course, I'm still hooked up to this thing, and the drag is just peeling off there. And I'm like trying to reel it in like I was going to actually catch this cow, And it was really kind of a cool feeling, because I'm going like, man, because that rod was just bent all over, and, and that cow's on a dead run. And I was kind of thought, well, maybe this is what catching a marlin is like, But I was like, I don't know what to do, because this thing's going to peel off all my line, and I can't get my lure back. And so finally I just grabbed the line, stopped the drag, and it broke the line. And Dad says, what the heck were you trying to do? And I just said, yeah, I thought maybe we might have hamburger tonight instead. So that was quite I almost caught a whopper, So that was kind of a fun memory there.
Hudson would be a little bit mad if you didn't release that one back.
Yeah, that would definitely have to be a catch and release. We wouldn't have had to access any more of that. That's for sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it might have been the 480 ponds, but I remember it was either me or Josh, and I think it was Josh had caught a fish, and he stuck it on the stringer and threw the stringer back out in the water and didn't ever and just let go of the stringer.
Yeah, that was actually that and some of these I guess, let's see. One of the problems that they had with the geography there was, if you get a lot of rain up in the hills, it would flood, like the streams and creeks that fed into the Kansas River would flood, and because it would come down, and the Kansas River Valley's flat.
Yeah, and
that is very good row crop type agricultural area, and so when that water would all come down off those hills and hit this flat area, it would spread out and then flood and stuff like that. And the city of Rossville, which was over just over from us, we grew up in St. Mary's. It had the all of a sudden I can't think of the name of that, Cross Creek.
Yeah,
Cross Creek what came through there, and it was notorious for flooding. And so they built a lot of what they call watersheds, and these aren't your let's get the cow something to drink type thing. It's not. I wouldn't officially call it a lake, but it's a lot. Those watersheds are a lot bigger than lakes, but smaller.
Bigger than ponds.
Bigger than ponds, smaller than lakes. Yeah, I was going to say that, said that wrong. And so that watershed there was built to, and I don't remember the name of that creek because when we were kids, this creek would be dry a lot of the times. And that sand bottom and that type of stuff. And so we'd go play. And like if there's a little bit of water, we'd take that sand and scoop it up and make little dams and that type of stuff and dam it up. And of course, eventually the water is going to overcome your dam type thing. And you're always constantly trying to keep it from breaking and that type of stuff. But anyways, that creek ran across the east side of St. Mary's. And one night it flooded, and we lived just down, a block or two from it. And it flooded, and it came in, and it just flooded our basement, anyways. And it was a nightmare cleaning that thing up. But anyways, they built a watershed to help control the water, to help control that thing from flooding. And that watershed was on the land that my cousin's husband owned. And then my other cousin on my dad's side, this cousin Linda was on my mom's side. Mm-hmm. And the other cousin Todd, he had bought a house that butted up against that property. And so anyways, we had permission to go fish there, and we fished this watershed, and we were kind of towards the back side of it, a lot of and we were catching, had a nice stringer, bass and that type of stuff. And so Josh caught one, he put it on there, and he threw the stringer out. I mean, he threw the whole stringer. He didn't hold on to the end. He threw the whole stringer out. He was just a kid too, but I remembered, that stringer went out, and I went out right after it.
Oh yeah. Cause
that thing no sooner landed in the water, and I was right behind it, landing in the water too. And I was able to get it and pull it out, but got myself wet doing it. So
yeah. I kind of did something like that out at Chiefs on accident. I put a fish on a stringer, and I went to toss it out, but as it was tossing out, the weight of the fish kind of jerked the rest of the stringer out in my hand, and it fell in the water. And I was trying to grab it as it was swimming off, and finally did. It's I told Steve, it was well, if you catch one on a stringer, that one's mine.
Mm-hmm. Actually, the other thing that we did have access to was at Manhattan was I'm trying to think how my mind goes. What's the name of that lake that's right there in Manhattan? Tuttle Creek. Yeah. Tuttle Creek. And so one of the things that right below Tuttle Creek is, of course, the spillway, and then the river, and it runs. I think that's the Blue River, and it runs into then the Call. And so we were fishing the spillway one time, yeah. And of course that's a real different type of fishing because it's a concrete, and that concrete's got to be a good, 15, 20 feet high. I don't know how high it is, but it's pretty tall.
Yeah.
And so anyways, I caught, I had this bite, and I'm reeling it in, and what I caught was somebody's them wire baskets. I think it had come through the spillway, and it had several fish in it. So I caught their basket, so it was kind of crazy. I didn't actually catch a fish, but I caught a basket full of fish.
I wonder if that just counts as one catch.
Yeah, and then if you catch it and the guy had caught something illegal in there, are you in trouble for it?
Be I'm just snagging trash. Yeah. Well, as long as you release it,
yeah.
Catch
and release type thing. Huh?
Yeah, because I think it's I think if you release the fish unharmed, it doesn't matter whether you catch it or not. It's whether or not you're able to release it.
Yeah. So, and the other thing too, if you ever want to go out and just put in Tuttle Creek, and it's an amazing thing to go see, but we've never been up there. If they got them tunnels or whatever, the spill, the water, and they open that thing wide open. That's an amazing thing to see. I've been there when we were younger a couple different times, and it's just the power of that water is just unbelievable, and it'll push the water coming out of the tube would be so much force it pushes the water down, and then it pushes it kind of up, and then that water then will fall back onto the water that's coming out of that tube, and it make this huge splash, and you're gonna get wet and everything. We took ponchos and rain ponchos and stuff like that, and went and you can stand right there, right next to it while it's happening. Now, I think last I heard that they were doing some work, and right now it was closed. I don't know if it still is or not, but you can go out definitely on YouTube and say, look up Tuttle Creek tube, release or something like that,
Yeah.
whatever, put in some search terms and see what I'm talking about. And that's pretty amazing thing to see that, and it's really amazing to see it live if you never get a chance to go see it.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, I mean, yeah.
If we're ever up there and they're doing that, we'll go do it. But
Check that thing
yeah,
out.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, but like, I said something to my sister because they'd had a lot of water. Was the last time we were up there? I don't remember, and I asked her. I said, "Hey, do you know if they're going to be releasing that thing?" Because my sister lives in Manhattan, so that'd be one thing for everybody to know. So, anyways, I asked them, if they were going to be releasing, and she said something about it. They were having to do some construction work and stuff like that, and then it had been closed. And I don't know if it still is or not. So, but that's a cool thing to see. Anyways,
yeah, I'll have to check that out sometime.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like it's probably about that time to be wrapping this dude up.
Okay. Well, there's still more stories, so I guess we can do a part 2 some other time.
Oh, you'll be back on. You'll be back on. Well, that's the nice thing about doing these podcasts. I mean, it's such like low monthly cost to do it that I can just do these all the time because uploading to YouTube's free. Really, like the editing software is like $100 a year. So, I mean, that roughly comes out to like $7-8 a month. So that's not really that much. And, as long as, since I have everything already paid for, I don't have any sort of like extra expense going on there. So these podcasts are, I mean, it's really just all about time. As long as I'm willing to put in the time in order to get these things edited and put it up there, I mean, I'll just continue to do these. And and I think one of the reasons why I do continue to do these is because it honestly promotes me to be better at fishing. And it promotes, because I sit there and break down my fishing experiences, and I'll see stuff in trying to figure out how to break it down that I'm like, oh, that's the reason why. Because I actually figured out that a little bit of a vertical fishing pattern on Stockton, because I pretty much, I went to a tackle shop that's kind of on the way to Stockton Lake, and the guy there was like, well, I haven't really heard anything about bass fishing. And this was, mind you, this was like a little bit right after the new year, like a week or so. So it was still pretty cold, and he's like, I haven't heard anything about the bass, but the crappie bite's on. And, and he's like, well, you'll need this and you'll need that. And I was like, okay, buying some crappie equipment because I don't have any sort of crappie equipment. And going out there trying to catch crappie, I ended up starting to catch bass. So I was actually able to figure out kind of a little pattern there, is that these bass were following these schools of crappie. So anywhere where you're catching crappie on the lake, as long as you kind of are fishing around the crappie, you can actually sometimes pick up bass.
Right, because the crappie are going to be there eating bait.
Yeah.
And so it's not that the bass would probably, well, I guess they could be eating some very small crappie type thing, but they probably chasing the bait around too. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, once the crappie get to a certain size, the bass would have to be getting up to like that 8, 9, 10 pound range. And when you start even talking about bigger bass than that, I mean, not bigger bass than that, but bigger crappie than that, then you're talking about double-digit bass. And I don't think that Stockton Lake's holding double-digit bass.
Well, a few maybe, but
yeah, a few that will never eat a lure.
Yeah,
you might catch it on like some live bait, but still, even then, those bass are so hard to catch. And oftentimes the reason why they get that big is because they got caught once before. And so they kind of they get kind of accustomed to that artificial lure.
Right.
So, all right. Well, thank you very much, Dad, for coming on to this podcast and being a guest and sharing these stories. And I'm hoping in the future we can go out and make some new memories and have some new stories.
Yeah, we definitely got to make some new memories and that type of stuff. And we got grandkids now that I got to introduce to the call and that type of stuff. So
they're still a little young.
I know they're still a little young, but you,
Elizabeth,
how old were you when you first went up there on the call?
Oh, I don't know.
I'm thinking you had to be 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah, I wasn't much older than Elizabeth.
Yeah, and she's 9.
Yeah.
So I don't remember exactly, but you weren't too terribly old yet, and that type of stuff. If you would have fell in, we probably would have had to pick you up downstream somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that, and also they haven't really gotten the experience with like a spinning setup or a bait casting setup, something a little bit more heavier duty than what they got. Because those little, what are they, Zepcos or what are those?
That they got, right.
Yeah, those things, I mean.
Hey, those things have caught stuff out of the river too. I'll guarantee you that.
Okay, well, yeah, and also don't forget that I can't forget that Elizabeth did catch that 7-pound bass off of one of those things. So she pulled in. They do catch big bass. Yeah. You can catch some sizable stuff.
You're gonna have to put that picture on your podcast.
I am, but I'll have to get it from Steve.
No, you have to get it from me.
Oh, I'll have to get it from you then.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah. Well. Maybe, I don't know. YouTube has a little bit of a funky thing with putting kids on stuff.
Oh,
so they're doing. It's a whole policy.
We'll tape a smiley face over her face.
What we'll do is we'll just put her mom's face like right over there. It's there you go. Yeah. No, but. Yeah, but she caught a big bass, and congratulations to her.
Yeah.
And hopefully she'll catch one bigger.
She's got my record, that's for sure. She's caught something bigger than me.
Well, she's caught something that has an official weight that's bigger than mine.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get to weigh my big bass. So yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you guys for tuning in. My name's Justin Ellis. You guys can follow me on Instagram at Justin_TDP fishing. You can also follow me on Facebook. It's just Justin Ellis. You can find me there. Go ahead, and if you guys like what you're seeing, or you guys want to subscribe to this, go ahead and like and subscribe. And hey, go ahead and just drop a comment down below about your biggest catfish or your biggest bass, and let's let us everybody know what maybe 2019's biggest fish was. So go ahead and drop a comment down below. Thank you guys. You guys have been wonderful. Thank you, Dad, for being here. You guys have a wonderful day. I'll see you out in the water. Bye.